Lawyers of Reddit, what is the sleaziest thing you've seen another lawyer try to slip into a document contract? I was told something really amusing recently. My client has directed me to is basically lawyer code for this dude pays my bills. And I don't agree with him. But I have to make a good faith effort to get my paycheck. So please, judge and opposing counsel, please don't believe I'm stupid enough to think this will work. I see my client has directed me to a lot. I got sucked into a dispute with a former employer once over intellectual property rights in an employment agreement. They kept trying to sneak in a clause into the agreement in every other paragraph that gave them ownership of, full rights, responsibilities for, and access to anything I did remotely related to programming or computers outside of work while not on the clock. It was so broad. Even my non-lawyer as knew it was an awful thing. It became a deadlock argument back and forth until I asked if they were accepting liability for any illegal activities I could perform outside of work. Suffice to say those clauses disappeared by Cobb the next day in the agreement. I once sent a contract adverse counsel for their client's signature. We had negotiated the final contract. This guy was a real sleazeball. He changed the contract to include a favorable provision for his client. Had his client sign and then sent back to us for counter signature. I don't remember how we caught it. But that is borderline malpractice right there. I get a lot of clients where the consultation goes something like this: client, can I do X? ME, no. X is illegal. And therefore you can't do X. Client, okay. I will do X anyway. Even without your help. ME, okay. But now that I know you plan to do X, I can no longer represent you. Because I cannot assist in illegal behavior. Client, can we pretend we never had this conversation? ME, no. We can't pretend we never had this conversation. I get a lot of those. I'm guessing they then go to another lawyer that they lie to. In one case that I worked on, a company had donated a bunch of money to various things in a small town that they were polluting. And the documents always had a clause basically saying, and you can never sue us for anything. The people accepting the contracts just thought it meant anything related to this donation or whatever. But nope. Most of the time other lawyers don't really try to slip sleazy stuff into documents, etc. But there are some lawyers who will try to do really sleazy things in other ways. It's really rare. However, this is primarily because your reputation in the legal community counts for a lot. Contrary to popular perception, we settle most cases. As a result, trust matters. Example, I am a plaintiff's lawyer. If I pretend that every case I have is a $1 million case, make stuff up, pound the table, manipulate witnesses, documents, etc., it will eventually become well known. The problem there is that when I really do have a $1 million case, every defense lawyer in town will know that I have a reputation as a consummate bulleter who can't be trusted. Believe it or not, I actually settled a case for $1 million yesterday. It was a class action and it was legitimately worth that amount. But I have a lot of other cases that are not worth that much money. And I won't pretend that they are. If we, my firm, had a reputation as a bunch of lying scumbags, we would have never been able to secure that settlement. Not a lawyer but a habitual defendant. During deposition, lawyers always tell you to go slow, and when handed something to read, never assume it is what the cover page indicates it is. Page through and read the entire thing. I was being deposed in a business dispute and was handed a multi-page document. From the first page it was clear that it was a document that I was very familiar with that was about 20 pages long. I slowly paged through the first few pages and it was the document I expected. I was about ready to set it down and say ready when my attorney said, "Did you read the whole thing?" So I went ahead and continued through the document. And what do you know? In addition to the full document, the other attorney had stapled some other important but disputed emails. Once I saw this, a little sidebar went down off the record. Of course their attorney claimed it was an honest mistake, but coming from an attorney I don't quite believe that. I'm not a lawyer. But when my parents got divorced, it was messy. Real messy. And it dragged on for 3 years. Finally my dad got his day in court, but almost had to reschedule because my mom owed her lawyer $2,000 and he was threatening to quit on the spot unless she paid him right then. My dad agreed to pay the lawyer for her as long as it was in the settlement. So they quickly made a new settlement. Something that was also changed was my mom was supposed to get half the money from the sale of their house, about $100,000. Well, I guess a lawyer was pissed at her because in the settlement it never specified when my dad had to sell the house. And he got to keep the house until he sold it. So he could have kept the house forever. After she had signed all the paperwork, then actually read the settlement, she was pretty pissed. My dad ended up selling the house for way cheaper than it was worth several years later. Contract theory is based on a notion of bilateral agreement to terms. Lawyers know this. And so they tend not to sleaze up contracts because they know how many ways there are to argue against unfair or deceptive provisions. Corporate entities, however, rely on people not being lawyers. So they write sleazy contracts and rely on the money they make from 9 people not challenging unfair provisions to offset the minor court costs of the 10th guy who brings a suit. So, as a regular person I managed to sneak something into my current apartment lease. If I signed before a certain date, I forgot, rent was like $50 a month cheaper. Or $500 over the course of the 10-month lease. When I failed to sign the cheap one they sent me a more expensive one. I signed the cheap one and sent it in with my first month's deposit and the lady at the desk accepted it and I saved $500 because, and I suspect this is true with all corporate rental companies in my town, they don't actually check to see if it is the same document. Scummiest thing I ever saw another lawyer do. The company I work for was planning on leasing a fairly large parcel of undeveloped property. I was involved with the lease negotiations from the beginning. And they were taking quite a while. Basically there were constant revisions to the proposed lease. Finally, after about 8 months of negotiation, we appear to have an agreement. I send over a copy of the lease to the other company's attorney for final review. And their client's signature if acceptable. They send a signed copy back about a day later, indicating that the contract is acceptable. I do a final review before I send it up to the executive to sign, since he didn't actually read these contracts. He just signed them after reading our summaries. And I notice that there have been small but significant changes to the contract. All in the other company's favor. Unlike all of the prior revisions, which had been clearly marked. This guy just made changes without notifying us. My intellectual property law professor told us a story where a company had a guy draw some blueprints. Fired him. Then changed the dates to make it seem like they had the prior art high ground. My professor and his partner tracked the guy down. He was in a dance band somewhere in the Midwest, and flaked to him. He said that he was so proud of the blueprints he drafted that he sent copies home to his mother with the original dates. The original documents were presented in court, which proved they altered the dates and the company paid out the as. I'm not a lawyer but an employment contract I was asked to sign had many pages and many places to sign. A couple of them had to do with giving the company I was applying to rights to my image and likeness. I just carefully removed those pages and returned the rest. I don't think they noticed and I was hired. Another company that I applied to sold tobacco and tobacco products and they wanted the right to take out a life insurance policy on me naming themselves as beneficiary. I walked away from that one. Penalty fees and contracts from European attorneys. If you don't do this, you owe us $XX. Where $XX is vastly out of proportion with the harm from not doing it. In the US, those provisions are generally illegal. Not sure about the EU. But here in the Netherlands, it's definitely illegal. Makes the clause invalid and has, on occasion, invalidated the entire contract. We just had a real estate contract where we had verbally agreed to price and conditions. When the buyer's agent sent the contract through, it was for $2,000 less than our agreed upon price and had several rather unnecessary repairs that would have cost us several $1,000s to finish. Had we signed it without reading closely, we would have been obligated to perform those things that we had never initially agreed to. On top of it all, the buyer is trying to back out of the contract now, even after she signed it. It's all very frustrating. Not a lawyer, but I work in the legal department for a charity. My favorite thing I've seen in a will was a clause which stated, "After my death, I request my loyal friend to destroy my laptop and PC hard drives. He knows why. Oh. And I've also had 2 tons of porn bequeathed in a will to the charity too. Needless to say, we didn't accept that legacy." I used to work in divorce. I learned that if you included an offer of attorney's fees to be paid to the other attorney as a part of an offer really favorable to your client, it seemed that that other attorney fought a hell of a lot harder to get their client to settle. Not that I'm cynical towards this profession. Mind you. S. As the gavel was coming down on the final settlement of my divorce, my lawyer stopped the judge and said, "Each party is responsible for their own legal expenses in this matter." My wife's attorney shrugged his shoulders, said okay, and it was done. I've always felt a bit guilty about this one, because it was an understanding all along that I was responsible for both legal bills. It just never made it into the final written agreement. Assuming I was paying, she hired a much more expensive attorney than I did. Her fees were $15 to $20,000. Mine were under $10,000. Does my landlord count? Told me when my lease was up I would switch to a month-to-month deal. That worked for 2 months before they sent me a letter. Bad news? $350 rent increase, 30%. Good news? If I sign a new yearly lease they will discount it $300. So, not much choice. I sign. 8 months down the road I have to terminate my lease. New job. I know there will be penalties, but this took the cake. $800 termination fee. That's okay, I get it. But then they tacked on the monthly discounts as well. So I ended up paying the monthly rate, which could have been terminated at any time, and the termination fee for the lease. At that point it's just taking advantage of people. I saw a prenuptial agreement that stated everything husband makes is 100% husband's, everything wife makes is 100% wife's. However, if wife works at husband's business, all of her labor is considered a gift to husband. She won't be paid and won't get a share of the business. The wife didn't speak English. The husband hired her attorney for her. The husband paid her attorney extra to backdate the prenuptial so it looked like she had more time to review it. And husband got a nice free employee out of the deal. I'm late, but whatever. My dad used to work for a big law firm in Macon. They did bankruptcy work among other things. One time, the board of directors of a retirement community decided to sell the actual land it was on to a real estate trust, a trust owned by the board of directors. They immediately foreclosed on themselves, evicted the residents, and personally took all the profits from the liquidated assets. It gets worse. It was in a small town in upstate NY. Everyone in the town worked for the retirement home in some capacity. They also all had stock in the home. When the board foreclosed, they lost their jobs. And all the stock they had paid back to them at pennies on the dollar. My dad quit the law firm that day. My dad runs a food company and one of their suppliers sneaked in clause stating that all liability for mislabeled allergens lands on my dad's company. Meaning if they bought guaranteed nut-free sugarcane and someone with a nut allergy died from eating the product made with that sugarcane, then my parents' company would be held liable. This, as you might imagine, is insane. My dad however caught it. Out lawyers had completely missed it, as did the lawyers of one of our customers who we knew bought from a similar supplier. Catching this was huge because the cost of missing it and having an issue come up would have been devastating. We of course told our customer we caught the clause and they ended up dropping the shared supplier entirely and refusing to do business with them. Just so we don't get too heavy on lawyer sleaze. In many years of practicing litigation law, The worst offenders were doctors and hospitals doctoring their records patient charts when sued for malpractice. I think doctors in general are much more dishonest than lawyers. Not that I'm holding out the legal profession as a paragon of virtue. I retired young to get away from it. Well, I'm not a lawyer. Hell, there wasn't even a lawyer involved. But there was a contract. When I was buying my house. Between that time when my offer was approved and the closing, I discovered that someone had gone there and stolen parts of the AC unit. So I informed the sellers that this would have to be fixed before the inspection. So what they did was send someone out there and removed the unit completely to prevent it from being stolen again. Fine. I forget exactly what happened. But we for some reason missed our original closing date, and to get it extended you signed like a little extension contract. They tried to slip into that contract that when they install the new AC, I would be responsible for any repairs or work that it required in case it was vandalized again from the time they put it in until the new closing. How about no? I struck that itch right off of there and they agreed to my amendment. TLDR. Sellers tried to get me to be financially responsible for an AC unit on a house that I hadn't bought yet.